Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our members of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine our show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion today, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience of SmithWeekly, including Matt S., Nick W., Paul M., and Brent S. New guest on the program today, Keith Bodnarchuk, has joined us. Keith is the president and CEO of Cosa Resources, an East Athabasca Basin exploration company that has a number of exploration grounds nearby existing uranium mines and deposits, along with a credible team who has had recent discovery success in the basin. The company is listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange under the symbol COSA and also on the US OTC markets under the symbol COSAF. Keith, great to have you on. Welcome.
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, Keith, first time on the program. Good to have you here. Why don't you just start things off for us here in the audience by throwing us your resume and why you took the CEO role at COSA?
Certainly. So, my background really, I grew up in Saskatchewan. I always had friends, family members who worked in the mines in northern Saskatchewan, the uranium mines, that is. And, so I was always naturally drawn to that sector. Did my geology degree at the University of Saskatchewan. Started off as a contract geologist with Cameco, working on the Millennium deposit. Then ultimately landed at Denison Mines, where I became a project geologist there for 10 years. Joined them right on the back of the discovery of the Phoenix deposit. Was there with the group when they discovered the Griffin deposit. Spent time working on Husky Zone, J Zone, their Zambian projects, which were ultimately sold to GoviEx. Then after about 10 years there, I decided, I wanted to enter into the business side of things. So I enrolled in an MBA at UBC here in Vancouver. I was completing my MBA and I've kind of reconnected with Steve Blower, who was the VP of Exploration at Denison Mines during my previous job. And, I wanted him to introduce me to banks. I thought ultimately I might end up kind of in the investment banking role. But he said, you know what, you have to meet this guy named Craig Perry, who was the CEO of IsoEnergy at the time. I I went and met Craig the next day. They hired me as the corporate development manager of IsoEnergy. It was a great time to join that group. They were just discovering Hurricane at the time. We obviously built that company from 30 cents to about $6 when I ultimately left in early 2021. From there, I joined Craig over at Inventa Capital, where I started to do some more corporate development, trying to expand my resume, outside of uranium. So I ended up taking the role of interim CEO with Archer Exploration and led it through the transaction of the nickel assets from Wallbridge. Then I also helped Visa Copper acquire Consolidated Woodjam. But in the background, I kept kind of building out COSA, knowing that, after I kind of sunk my teeth in a few more deals in the corporate development space and kind of expanded my resume, I was ready to take on the CEO role of Cosa Resources in the uranium space, where I have that long technical background. And so then I ended up taking the role in early 2022 for Cosa Resources, and then really put my head down and spent the last 15 months building out the current land portfolio that we have at Cosa and expanding the team to where we are now and where we're starting to talk about the story.
And you didn't venture too far from uranium. Seems like you took maybe a brief break, but it sucked
Yeah,
you back in.
exactly. Yeah, for sure it does. I think it's always been my passion, especially, it being such a prominent part of the Saskatchewan, workforce and culture, really.
Yeah, good time to be involved, I think. So I want to get into COSA in just a moment, but as this is a first introduction podcast introducing you and the company, I'd like to also just get your view of the uranium market and how you see the uranium market, and also coupled with the need for viable discoveries at this point.
Yeah, for sure. I really think we're actually in unprecedented times in the uranium market. I think, obviously short term, you'll hear a lot of experts and people speaking in the space about these short-term catalysts with new uranium funds coming online, like things like Zuri Invest. And we all saw what happened once the Sprott Uranium Trust entered the market last year, what it did to the spot price of uranium. But it's just overall the market sentiment is at the highest it's ever been, I feel. You have people on the right side of the aisle and left side of the aisle both understanding that, uranium mining and nuclear power itself is going to be such an important part of the future going forward. And obviously what's happening at the world, Russia, Ukraine, you hope that they get to a resolution there. But what that's led to is energy security issues. And that is a real thing. And, you see what's happening with how China is really pushing towards becoming basically the biggest customer of uranium source from Kazakhstan. You start to wonder what the rest of the world's going to do. I mean, U.S. is still, what do they consume? About 25% of the uranium still in the space. And so, what are they going to do if Kazakhstan, the largest consumer of uranium in the world, or largest producer of uranium in the world, is kind of more cozying up with China? So that really leads to Canada, right, and the Athabasca Basin, where you have the highest grade deposits in the world, the most valuable deposits in the world, and really a need to secure supply and start finding new supply so that we can really help out the rest of the Western world, largely driven by the U.S.
Thank you for that. So the company is just finishing off an approximate $5 million Canadian capital raise. This was announced back in May. Talk about how this went. What is the immediate plans for the capital, and how much runway does this give the company in terms of not having to come back to the market, unless, of course, notable company-specific success occurs?
There was a lot of demand for it. I think it kind of goes back to when we started Cosa. We listed it in March of last year. We raised $2 million, largely just passing the hat around to really people in our group. We didn't have any uranium projects at the time. And we put our heads down and just went to work acquiring assets and piecing together the land package we currently have. And we didn't really raise any capital since then. So we've been kind of protecting that $2 million we raised. $2 million we raised. We hadn't really been taking salaries and things like that. So this is really the first time since we've kind of took the cap off this company, I would say, or pulled the cover off this company, that we are starting to come to market as this new uranium story, but led by a team that's had their fingerprints on a lot of the success in the basin over the past 15 years. So honestly, it was within the first half an hour of announcement, there was just a huge amount of demand. We ended up taking just over $5 million. Left a lot of appetite out there. I think it's a good number. It's one that will really lead us through our next few phases of exploration on our projects. We're going to start doing some geophysics right away on our URSA project, which will be followed up more detailed ground geophysics, and which then will be followed up by a maiden drill program in early 2024. As far as runway, this easily carries us through that maiden drill program and, well beyond, I mean, even to the end of 2024, if need be, from a capital standpoint. So we're in good position. We'll have just over $6 million in the bank. And so, yeah, great position to start exploring our projects in a meaningful way.
Sounds good, Keith. Yeah, looking forward to seeing how this gets utilized and some of the progress that we have over the next 12 months or so. While we're on the topic of kind of the financing side of things, why don't you cover off the capital structure of the company for us at this point? Any major shareholders that you can mention, and also where management and the board stands with their ownership?
We're just under 34 million shares outstanding at this point. It's largely controlled by management and insiders and advisors. We control about 35%. We are the largest shareholders. We funded this venture from beginning through all the rounds of financing. So as far as strategic investors, it's really us. So it's me, it's Chairman Steve Blower, Wes Short, another guy that founded it with me, Craig Perry, obviously a long track record in the uranium space, and a strategic advisor for the company. So that's largely it. We're the largest shareholders. So that's why I said once we came to market here, there was a lot of appetite from the usual suspects in the uranium space to get in on this company.
Why don't you cover off for me some of the management team members? I know you've mentioned some already. Of course, Craig Perry, we've discussed. Would like to have you say a few things about Steve and some of his background and some of the work that he's been able to deliver upon in the basin. Really, all these folks here are key people that were at ISO and really led to that discovery. Just talk about the people at the company and key folks you'd like to mention.
Yeah, certainly. So I think it really starts at the top with our chairman, Steve Blower. I think Steve really has an unmatched track record of discovery in the Athabasca Basin. He was the VP of exploration at Denison Mines when they discovered Griffin and expanded Phoenix. He moved on from there to help assist NextGen with their initial resource, and then joined the spin out of IsoEnergy as the VP of exploration at that moment. And he led the team through the discovery of Hurricane. When we were at IsoEnergy, we ended up selling some assets to 92 Energy. Steve joined them on the board and really as their lead advisor, technical advisor, and then obviously they came across the GMZ zone. So really, he's had 3 significant discoveries in the past 15 years, and has really created a significant amount of value for shareholders, and so really unmatched track record. And he's really the brainchild of the assets we put together here at Cosa. And so he's been a mentor of mine a long time, a close friend, and he's heavily involved with Cosa on a day-to-day basis. Next, I'll touch on Craig Perry, who I mentioned before. He is our strategic advisor at Cosa Resources. His office is right next to mine here. He's also quite active with the company. He's obviously a founder of NextGen. He was the founding CEO of IsoEnergy, and ultimately led that from 50 cents to $6. And he's had a tremendous amount of success even outside the uranium space, being the chairman of Vizsla Silver, former chairman of Skeena, and just a track record of creating a lot of value for shareholders and really building companies from almost nothing to billion-dollar companies. So it's having him and Steve both heavily involved in Cosa is really helping us as we continue to advance this company. On the management level, we have Andy Carmichael, who's our VP of exploration. So when Steve and I left IsoEnergy, Andy took over as the VP of exploration of ISO. He obviously led them through their initial resource, which is the highest grade resource in the history of the Athabasca Basin, being just shy of 50 million pounds at 34.5% uranium. And then the other guy is Justin Rodko, who was a senior geologist at IsoEnergy, also part of the discovery team of Hurricane, along with Steve and Andy. And he's since joined Cosa as our corporate development manager. So, as far as the people responsible for finding the Hurricane deposit, Craig, Steve, Andy, and Justin, we have all 4 of them currently working with our team. And obviously Steve's track record goes well beyond that. And so, so we truly have the band back together on that front. And really what I'd say is probably the best team in the exploration space in the Athabasca Basin.
Well, Keith, that's a bold statement. Best team inspiration within the basin. I think that's good, and that's what attracted us to contact you and to look pretty hard at this company. And so, come back for a moment on something you said. Assembling this property portfolio. Why were these projects, Ursa and Astro? Talk about how these were assembled. Talk about the thought process that was behind this, and how you guys got the vendor to move these assets into the company.
Yeah, so like I said, when we listed Cosa, we knew that we wanted to really focus on putting together assets in the Athabasca Basin. And we really wanted to protect that cash position and not go to market, just marketing a story without having good assets to back it up. And so we really spent, 14, 15 months with our heads down, piecing together these projects. And it was really Steve Blower that decided what direction we were going to take this company is on an asset basis. And I think the best way to describe it is that this is what Steve always says is locally, it's very difficult to find these deposits, but regionally there is a bit of a pattern to it. You have these long northeastern corridors in the Athabasca Basin where you can map, MacArthur River down to Griffin Phoenix, down to Key Lake. As Steve said, in order to set ourselves up, for exploration success, we got to put ourselves within these corridors. And so that's what we did, right? We obviously, in July of last year, we acquired some ground from a vendor that was Castor Charcoal and part of Ursa. And then it was really in December of last year where we managed to piece together the vast majority of the Ursa project. We had our heads down working on acquiring these assets, and we actually got the majority of Ursa through staking, where it became available. And what usually happens in the Athabasca Basin is that land becomes available. There's a lot of people that attempt to stake it online, and it becomes very fragmented where you can't can't really piece together a meaningful project. But for some reason, people were asleep at the wheel over Christmas last year, and we managed to piece together 60 kilometers of the Cable Bay Shear Zone. And so once we did that, I just remember Steve sitting back, basically saying, "Okay, guys, we got our project. Now let's get to work." And just taking one step back further, the east side of the basin, we always talk about it is infrastructure rich, which makes it easier to work both from an exploration standpoint, but it is starting to be extensively explored, especially in and around areas like McArthur River and Key Lake, obviously. And so it's starting to leave not a lot of room for those elephant-sized deposits. Maybe there's room for another hurricane-sized deposit, but even those are starting to become few and far between just due to the density of exploration that's happened. And so we took a step back and we decided, okay, so where would the logical place for that next great district to be, that next great trend, right? Obviously, Next Gen Vision, those guys have it happen in the Patterson Lake area. So where is that next one going to be, where there's a lot of meat left on the bone, and where there's potential for these, multiple discoveries? And that really led us to go slightly deeper into the basin, into the Cable Bay Shear Zone. It's the next long northeastern trend, which is a great analog to, McArthur River and Key Lake and those areas. And that's where our Ursa project is. And so that, like I said before, how we pieced that together, became something where we just feel that, yes, it is slightly deeper to the unconformity of that area, but it's worth the risk to really go after those large elephant-sized deposits. And it's an area that's been identified in the past, with past exploration, led by, I guess, is Uranus, followed by Kojima, and really held by Orano well into the 2000s. And I think if it wasn't for Fukushima really setting back the uranium exploration market for darn near 2 decades, this would be a project that wouldn't be available, and it might even have discoveries on it at this point. And so, for us to be able to piece it together, and especially in this, uranium market, which has really taken off here, to grab a project that we feel that strongly about, was a huge win for us.
Yeah, it sounds pretty compelling. So I want to follow what you guys progress here. And on the two key projects, Ursa and Astro, start with either one. These things are pretty greenfield, Keith. I mean, there's almost no work that's been done on them. There's a little bit of work, but talk about how you're identifying the drill targets for the upcoming maiden program. What is planned next for really testing out those targets?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll start with Ursa. I think, I don't like to say that we have a flagship project, especially when we're this early on in exploration. I think you can call a project flagship once you have a discovery. We've always taken the mentality that, we're going to drill it and kill it. If it's not yielding results, we'll move on. And so it'll be the next project, next one in the pipeline that we'll go after. I think, it's important to remember that at IsoEnergy, it wasn't the 5 projects that we got from NextGen. It wasn't the 6th project. I think it was the 7th project that we bought where we ultimately found the hurricane deposit. So you can't get married to these projects. You have to be ready to move on if it's not showing results that you like. And you just have to keep, analyzing land and bringing in new ground to keep that pipeline of exploration projects. But going back to Ursa itself, so you're right, it is somewhat greenfields. Like I said, it was more so explored in the 80s and 90s. There's probably been along a 60-kilometer trend. There's probably been 12 to 15 drill holes completed in the past, which is nothing from an exploration standpoint in the basin. But what those drill holes did hit was some structure and a bit of weak uranium mineralization. Up to 0.2% U3O8 over 0.2 meters in the basement. And that doesn't seem that significant relative to what high grade deposits there on the basin. But that's kind of how sometimes these monsters start to show themselves, right? When we were at IsoEnergy, it was a weakly elevated uranium structure in the sandstone that we tested down at the unconformity where we hit hurricane. When we were at Denison, next to Griffin, there's some weak mineralization in the basement. We targeted up at the unconformity, didn't hit anything significant, went down dip and hit Griffin. So the fact that this trend, with the limited drilling is already showing that it's fertile with uranium mineralization, that's a huge positive. And another thing interesting about this area too is that, despite all those drill holes, they never intersected a conductor. These graphitic conductors are something that's very important for deposits on the east side of the basin. Um, they're one, it's what all the current mines are associated with. McArthur River, Cigar Lake all have these graphitic conductors. So the fact that, this was explored, drilled, they hit some weak uranium mineralization and never proved their geophysical conductor, that's just starts checking all the boxes for us, right? Where the optimal target has yet to be hit along this long trend, yet they've already hit some structure in uranium mineralization. So what this thing is begging for is modern geophysics. Geophysics has really advanced over the past 20 years as to where we can more confidently target these somewhat deeper targets. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We'll be starting a program probably in actually about 10 days here, where we do some airborne EM over top of our entire Ursa trend. What that'll help us with is start to identify these conductors. And really, we hope it shows that, okay, these drill holes actually weren't targeting the right spot. And once we identify, some areas along that 60-kilometer trend, we'll go in and do a little bit more detailed ground geophysics, EM, which will help refine these targets ahead of our drilling campaign in 2024. And so, it does take a little bit of time to do these geophysics, but it's very important. And this is exactly what these trends and these areas have been lacking over the past is modern geophysics. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Ursa, there's also the Orion project, which is really an extension of Ursa. So they're kind of one and the same. And we'll also cover that with airborne geophysics. And then we'll look to advance Helios and Astro and a few other projects over the next 12 months where we end up doing geophysics on those ones too. It is kind of the theme with all of our projects is that we do need those modern geophysics because we are looking at areas that have been overlooked in the past. And that is our thesis for finding that next great deposit and maybe that next great trend where we can have multiple deposits is going after these overlooked areas that need this modern work. And so that'll be the next, busy for the next six to 8 months. Really, we'll be doing that geophysics. Then obviously we'll be heading out to drill Ursa in 2024.
Sounds good. And with this, Keith, touch on local community relations, First Nations. Tell us about your efforts on this front.
We have a team that's had a lot of experience in the basin. Even myself, I've been working there really since 2007. Steve and Andy longer than that. And so we've really developed good relationships with the northern communities through employing jobs and just overall support in local community functions and programs. And so, Andy's done a great job of already reaching out to these local people. I think he's planning on heading in this summer to go visit with them, and I'll do the same. I think it's just something, like I said, I grew up in Saskatchewan. I have a long-standing relationship with the northern communities, even going back to playing hockey in that area. It's something that we really take, we value, and it's something we take very seriously. And, we really got on our front foot and just went to work right away of reaching out and just, hopefully providing a lot of jobs in the future and just really working with the northern communities.
Always good to make sure that those efforts are moving forward, even though the company is small. And obviously those will ramp up as the company grows here. Well, Keith, the Athabasca Basin is probably the most dense place on Earth for junior companies who are professing, of course, to be in the uranium exploration business. Why is Cosa a standout compared to all of the others?
You know what? I do feel very strongly about the assets we have. I've touched on why we think they could potentially have good results. But I think really in the uranium space and exploration specifically, you got to follow teams. I touched on it before that, these teams have to be nimble, they have to be agile, they have to be ready to move on from their project if it's not yielding results. And, that's what it takes to have a discovery. And, I go back to ISO, where it was the seventh project we had, where we ultimately found the Hurricane deposit. And, Steve and Andy, the fact that they were willing to move on from these other projects and spend money at Larock East, to discover Hurricane just goes to show that they had an instinct or even just a skill set that told them, okay, we need to move on to these other targets. And so I think it is important to back a team in the uranium exploration space. And, that's exactly what we're presenting as, a team that, like I said, it's a new story, but we've really had our fingerprints on the majority of success in the basin over the past 15 years. And this is an opportunity for people to really participate in the story early on.
Key, so the company does have another project, non-uranium, the Heron Copper Project.
Yeah.
Any plans here? Is the project to be monetized to support the primary uranium focus? What's the plan with the project here?
Yeah, and so we listed with that project. I mean, it was available. It was interesting in the sense because Rio Tinto was earning in on the Janus Lake copper project next door, and we saw something in the geology where it could eventually be an analog or even just the other side of a syncline fold, which could yield, decent copper results. And so it's not a focus of ours right now. I think, I'm a long-term believer in the copper price, and I think that could be an opportunity to keep that ground in good standing if there is any sort of copper rush in Saskatchewan in that area, which, it's very possible it could be something where we could potentially farm it out.
Appreciate you covering on what that was for and the plans. Talk about the overall efforts to increase company awareness and also improve the company's listing, getting off the CSE and maybe onto something like the TSXV. Is this something that we can expect, say, over the next 12 months, Keith, or you think it's further out? Just talk about that.
No, it's definitely something that we are going to work towards here over the next. I mean, you can even say 6 to 8 months is working towards an uplisting to the TSXV, also a listing on the OTC. It's something that, as we continue to grow this company, that it is very important to us to get more eyes on this story. I think I touched on in the past that, we really had our heads down for the first 14 months of this company being listed because, we felt we had to put together a team and also a land package that made sense for us to start marketing the story. And now, as we kind of lift the cover off this thing, I think you're going to see a lot more eyes on this story, especially as, the tailwinds in the uranium space can continue. It's going to be a story that a lot of people are going to want to follow.
Absolutely agreed. Be great to see you get out the CSE and move on to something that's better. So looking forward to seeing that progress. And then OTC upgrades, QB, QX, that type of setup in the US would be useful. You know this, and that's good. There's some CEOs in this sector and other sectors that just don't understand these types of things. And I know you certainly do. So I appreciate your comments on that. To wrap up, Keith, for potential investors who are listening in, Cosa Resources has a market capitalization of about 12 million Canadian here. What do you say to investors who are considering the prospects of this company as part of their junior uranium exposure?
This is a new story, but we are a team that's really had their fingerprints on a lot of success in the base in the past 15 years. We are hungry, we're competitive, we have a group of geologists that are extremely passionate about the space and they're willing to go in that extra effort, what it takes to make that next great discovery. Obviously there's a lot of tailwinds in the uranium space, and you've seen a lot of juniors in the space even have valuations, well north of $50 million in their market cap. So for us to be sitting as low as we are right now, I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to come in, as we continue to lift the cover off this thing and get more eyes on the story. I don't suspect we'll be at this 12 million valuation that long.
And Keith, best way for investors to contact the company?
Yeah, so you can contact through the website. It's a good way to contact us through our email at info@cosaresources.ca.
Well, Keith, it's been a pleasure. Best of luck with the company and looking forward to talking again soon.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Andrew.